Ladies and gentlemen, angry Americans around the country, around the globe, we have a very, very special guest joining us today on this episode. Somebody I've been so eager to talk to for a long time, a man I admire, a man who inspires me, and a man who is very much in many different ways a man of the moment, coming to us live from Brooklyn, New York, one of the epicenters of the fight on the coronavirus, the great and powerful Jeffrey Wright.
Well, thanks, Paul, for having me. You're easy to impress.
Well, I really am so grateful that you're making time. Number one, because you're pretty deep in the fight, but number two, because you're a cool guy, you're a generous guy. You've been very supportive of me over the years. You're supportive of so many people in so many different areas, high profile and low profile. But first of all, just how are you doing, man? You're in Brooklyn with your family. Can you give us kind of a sense of how you're doing, how your family's doing, and what it's like where you are, really deep in a battleground for the fight against the coronavirus?
Yeah, we like most people here in New York are laying low and maintaining as well as we can. I'm in Brooklyn, in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. I can look out this window and see Brooklyn Hospital just across the way there, and that is a hot spot for this as well. And so trying to be supportive of that, but we are just maintaining. I have my 90-year-old aunt who is living with me now. My mom passed away last fall. I was raised by two forceful women, and they lived together until the time of my mom's passing down in D.C. So she, my aunt, who's a former nurse, was a nurse at D.C. General Hospital in Washington, which is now defunct, formerly federally funded facility and a safety net facility. She was there for 35 years or something. And so anyway, she's living with us now. So most critical for us is making sure she's okay, giving her a wide circle, sitting on the opposite end of the table from her for meals, and just keeping her safe. So we're doing well as can be expected. I am fortunate in that I, reasonably sure I can make it through this thing, without too much of a financial undoing. I have a job waiting for me. I was in the middle of filming Batman in London when I headed back this way. So, I feel relatively secure in that. Again, I'm fortunate, but trying to stay safe, keeping our our health at the foremost of our thinking.
So I want to dig into a number of elements of this, Jeffrey, but just so we can kind of explain to folks how we got to know each other. I don't know if you know this, but I think you started to break out when I was at Amherst in the late 90s. I think it was like 93, 94. I got to Amherst in 94 and then graduated in 98. And I felt like your rise coming out. And I don't know when Basquiat came out, but you were like in the newsletter.
Basquiat came out around that time.
Yeah. So you were in the newsletters. You were like a guy from our college that we were all rooting for.
Who was doing weird stuff that nobody else was really doing.
Yeah. But you were a guy that, I think it's such a small school. It's like 1,600 students there. And the alumni, I think, is pretty well connected. But that's how I first knew of you, was just watching your rise. And, you had the Angels in America and Basquiat. And I was always rooting for anybody who was from Amherst. And then fast forward years later, we connected, I think initially through my work at IAVA. And you've been so amazing for so many different causes. I don't know if folks know you've done, supportive projects for veterans. You've been incredibly involved politically on Twitter, but getting to know you has been a real privilege. And I just want folks to know that you're a very generous guy. And you also, I admire how much you're not afraid to throw a punch. You're mixing it up. So I want to maybe start by asking you, how is it being in, the entertainment space in the way you are? And, maybe 10 years ago, actors, artists would have been reluctant to get in the mix. You're out there, man. You're throwing punches every day. You're calling people out. You're I think really forcefully and effectively criticizing the president. What's that like for you, and how do you view your role in the landscape? Before the Corona stuff happened, you were, I think, an important voice for America. But how do you view your role now and the ability to make an impact for you as an individual?
Well, yeah, I guess, Twitter is what it is. It's it's a great tool. It's also a cesspool. But I'm in there down in the septic mess, but um, I grew up in Washington, D.C. My mom was a lawyer for the U.S. government, for customs for 30 some odd years. Everybody in Washington, when you're born in Washington, doctor smacks you on your ass and asks you what your political affiliation is. That's the way it goes, Of course, we're DC. Most of us tend to be left-leaning, but, that's the routine. And then I went to Amherst a little before you were there. I was a political science major before I started acting. I didn't start acting until I was a junior, late my junior year. I took courses with some great political thinkers, some of whom are still there: Austin Sarrett, Paul Kateb, Henry Steele Commager, one of the foremost constitutional historians in the history of our country, was one of my professors. He gave me great insight one day. I'll never forget it. He said, "Hey, don't speak with your hands." So that was, gems like that, were formed part of my education. But, so listen, that's who I am. I've always been just, by nature of my birth and my upbringing, interested and involved in understanding what the political sphere is that's happening around me. While at Amherst, we're students looking for a cause, and sorry, the turtles are over there rebelling. But while at Amherst, we students were looking for a cause, and our big push and effective push was around divestment of the school's endowment from businesses involved in a part doing business or doing associated with apartheid South Africa. So it's always been, an interest for me. When I started acting, what I discovered was the stories that I was most drawn to were stories that had a relevance to our politics, to our country, to issues. Those are the things that compelled me when I read them. So the first film that I did, for example, was a miniseries called Separate but Equal, in which Sidney Poitier played Thurgood Marshall. It was Burt Lancaster's last film. He played the counsel that argued opposite Marshall. I forget his name. It'll come to me. But I got the role, or at least I got invited to audition because I had a political science degree. So they said, "Yeah, get that guy in here," So and then Angels America, which is really kind of the epicenter of my artistic life, and in many ways, reshaped me as a human being. Was a piece infused with urgent political concern, with moral outrage, but done with meticulous artistic beauty and craftsmanship, and the architecture of the storytelling is just, it's just singular. So that early on in my career convinced me even more that it was possible or even necessary to kind of infuse these things into my creative life. And so I was spoiled early, and I've tried when I can to be, kind of unabashedly political in my creative expression when I can.
I think I've been
not apologizing for it, bro.
No, I'm glad you don't. I mean, I've been grateful for it, and it's been an inspiration to me and others, I think, who are activists and who are advocates, to know, you're out there, fighting the good fight and supporting so many others who do.
Well, I hope I'm relatively informed, You
are. I think that's the other part. I don't want to. Yeah. I wouldn't want to tangle with you on Twitter or on the debate stage. I mean, you're effective, and you have incredible reach now, right? Your reach continues to grow with Westworld, and now with Batman, and with the Bond films and everything else. But I want to take a couple steps back. Number one, I can't let the turtles go. Like, what the hell is going on with the turtles in your room? I can't see it. It's off screen. If folks are listening, they can tune into the video later and see the really cool wall of stuff behind you. That I think includes, I think I can see your Tony on the wall over one shoulder.
I suppose.
I saw, was it a Golden Globe or another award behind you in the back?
Yeah, it's yeah. Well, that it won't fit up on the top. I try to at least stuff it up on the top
Uh-huh.
somewhere, so that one won't fit. Yeah, that's
And noisy turtles. So what
noisy turtles. Well, they're less noisy now because I turned off their filter in their basking area. Maybe I'll show them to you later. And now they're like, one of the dude is chewing on the water spout and all kinds of stuff going on. But those are my guys, man. And well, there's a male and a female, two red-eared sliders that came home with my kids and their mom, my ex-wife Carmen at the time, from Canal Street, like in a brown paper bag or something. They had these two like quarter-sized turtles that are now plate-sized, and as a part of the separation, the turtles came with me. So because I tend to look after them, but
that's
they're
like real. That's like the real Ninja Turtle story, basically, like a Teenage Ninja Turtle story. I can't let you get away without telling us the names. What are the names of the turtles?
The male is the female is Mouse, and the male is Nancy Nippleton, of course.
Of course.
My daughter named them at that time. We didn't realize which was which gender. So there they are.
This is the beauty of coronavirus media, where we can actually be in your home hearing about your turtles. We hear the alerts coming in that are probably your family members saying, "Where the hell are you?" But let me stay on a piece that I ask of everybody, Jeffrey. Every guest we have is an iconic, important, and inspiring American. You hit all three, but you're a man of great taste, of great experience, of great wisdom. What is your drink of choice? We can't have a drink in person today, but what is your drink of choice, your adult beverage of choice?
That's an easy one. It's going to be somewhat self-serving because I'm also an investor in this company, this brand, Uncle Nearest. Premium Tennessee whiskey. It is the most awarded Tennessee whiskey of the last 3 years. It's a relatively new bottle, one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing independent label in the business. And it is a bottle that is named in honor of a man named Nearest Green. And not only is it a fantastic tasting whiskey, it is far and away the best story in whiskey. Nearest Green was the man who, when enslaved and working on a farm in Lynchburg, Tennessee, took on a young boy and taught him to make whiskey, because he was managing a whiskey operation on a farm there. This young boy came to work with Nearest when he was 13. Nearest mentored him, taught him everything he knew about making whiskey. That young boy's name was Jack Daniel. And Nearest Green was the man who mastered the process that differentiates Tennessee whiskey from bourbon. It's a charcoal mellowing process, which is known as the Lincoln County process, Lincoln County, Tennessee. Nearest Green, a man whose services were purchased, who was rented from a company called Landis, the Landis Group or something like that, in Tennessee, was brought to this farm as a slave to man the whiskey operations, and taught Jack Daniel everything he knew. Jack Daniel ended up buying the whiskey operation from this farmer, from this preacher farmer named Dan Call, after the Civil War, and he moved his operation up the road a little bit, where the Jack Daniel distillery sits now, and Nathan Nearest Green was his first master distiller. And so this bottle, long story how it came to pass. There was an article in the New York Times, I think in 2016. Brown-Forman, the company that owns Jack Daniel, was starting to tell the real history, as opposed to the story that, Jack Daniel learned to make whiskey from this preacher, Dan Call, this white preacher farmer, and the rest is history. No, that wasn't the story at all. And so I read this article about Nathan Nearest Green and the actual history. Likewise, a woman named Fawn Weaver, who was in Singapore at the time, read the article. I got fired up about it. I I clipped this picture out, this amazing set of pictures there. I would tell every bartender that I came across about this story. It was one or two, over the course of a year that I would come across, bartenders, that is. Anyway, I just fell in love with this story, and she did as well, but she got so fired up and so angry that a few weeks later, she headed to Lynchburg, Tennessee to start to research. She researched so deeply that she knew more about the history of Jack Daniel than the company itself. In fact, she interviewed the son of the biographer of Jack Daniel. And at the end of the interview, she said, "Oh, by the way, who owns the rights to this book?" She said, "Oh, I think, Jack Daniel's company owns it, So she went and discovered they, in fact, did not. So she purchased the rights to Jack Daniel's biography. So if you go to the gift shop, Jack Daniel's Distillery, and you buy his biography, you're buying it now from our company. She set up this company after doing all of this research, created this bottle. The recipe came from a descendant of Jack Daniel's by marriage. Our first master or whiskey operations master is a woman named Sherry Moore, who's descendant of Jack Daniel's by marriage. There are members of both families, the Green family and the Jack Daniel's family, that have come together to put this company together. There's some proceeds from the sales that go to a scholarship fund for descendant of of Nearest Green, because some of these folks were still working as common laborers at the Jack Daniel's Distillery, even though it was their ancestor who mastered the product that has become this iconic brand, multi-billion-dollar global brand. And so I reached out to Fawn. I owe my relationship, my investment into her. I reached out to her. I said, "I love this story." When I found out that this bottle had come into being, I said, I'd love to help you tell this story. And if you need a couple of bucks more, I'll do that too, because I think you really got something going here. And so Uncle Nearest, get a little taste of that, and a little taste of that history too. Right now, we could all use a little Uncle Nearest. Now, man, it's. I don't think spirit sales are suffering right now. As long as you can get them online.
They're up, I think, hundreds of percentage points. But I think that is, Jeffrey, that is the most fascinating and enlightening answer we've ever had to that question in the history of this show. And I knew
the spirits hit me, man.
Oh.
You can go to Uncle Nearest. You can go to unclenearest.com to order it, and you can also see a couple of short films that we did. One that we shot on the original farm where old Number 7 still was situated. It's and there's a visitor center too. We were in the process of building out the entire operation, because we were farming out the distillation and bottling, and now that's all going to be in-house. But if you go, it's such a beautiful piece of the part of the country, and the farm, which Fawn bought as well, where this original still was situated, is gorgeous, and you can see the stream whose water was used to make the whiskey. There are still old rusted pipes from the original still running out, and just across from that stream are the rock stone foundations of some of the old structures that were there. Slave houses, many of them. It's an encapsulation of the American story in such an incredible way. If you go visit, it's really very moving. But Jack Daniel's, the company, Brown-Forman, didn't even know that that's where old Number 7 was situated, this original farm. So Fawn bought that too. She bought the farm in the best way. Wow. Now, the thing is about the wonderful little detail of the story. Old Number 7 on the bottle, right?
Yep.
Old Number 7 refers to, she thinks, according to her research, the number of the still where the whiskey was made. But they redrew the district lines, and they renumbered all of the stills. And so what had been the Number 7 still, Jack Daniel's and Nathan Green still, became Number 16, but everybody wanted the whiskey from Old Number 7. So that's where that came from on the bottle, on that square bottle. Yeah, it's cool stuff.
Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
This is a theme of the show. You may not know this, but we end each show with the presentation of an American whiskey. And we talk a lot about whiskey. We've talked a lot about bourbon. We've talked a lot about all of it. So folks who are listening are gonna drink that up. They're gonna love that story. And I think if there's another pandemic, that sounds like the place that we need to be. To hide out for a while.
Yeah, hold up right there.
Yeah, man. But that's an incredible, and it also it shows me too all the different layers of how you're so involved in the history and the activism and the business and the storytelling of this country. It's one of the reasons why I was so excited to have you on this show. But I want to ask you to go back into the way back machine, back into DC or wherever it was, and tell us an answer to a question I ask of all our guests as well, which is, Jeffrey Wright, what was your first car?
My first car was, I believe I was a sophomore in college. I think it was the summer of my sophomore year. I worked in DC for the Washington Gas Company, summer gig. And maybe it's after my freshman year. Best gig ever, one of the best gigs I ever had in my life, man. I was toting a jackhammer. I was shoveling holes all damn day, where these other guys would go down and they would fix these big gas mains. I was a member of the International Union of Gas Workers. I was making more money than I ever made in my life, triple time on Sundays, 21 hour. We were down there doing it. And I was a brick at the end of the summer. And I had a good amount of cash in my pocket. And so I went in Washington Post and I found a used 1972 BMW 2002 I think I bought for like $1,200. And I had an uncle, the mom's sister, down in Tidewater, Virginia, who was a body and fender man, and he was masterful. That guy, they called him the Resurrector. He would just, he could just bring a car back from the dead, man. And so I drove down there, and he beautiful little ride. And I had been, I'd adored these cars. I'd seen them all, so he tightened it up. I think that was like 1980, was that 84, 85? So it was a 12-year-old, car at that time, but he just put a job on that thing, man. So I drove back up to Amherst, and about 2 months after I got to Amherst that fall, damn near totaled.
How did you near total it? And I got to ask you too. I said, well, what color is this car? Because
it was like kind of it was a blue. It was a little bit of an electric blue, man. The sunroof. I had a stereo that I'd popped into it. It was, it was cranking, and I was tweaking the carburetor one day outside our house where we lived, and one of my friends came out, and I said, Russell, let's go for a ride, man. He said, because I had to do a little carburetor. He said, we're gonna do some speed. I said, yeah, man, let's go. And it's like about 3:00 in the afternoon. School's just getting out. The local, and we're just flying, man, up these little narrow New England roads. And I came to this turn I did not quite judge as I might have, and I fishtailed to the left. I'll never forget it. Caught it, brought it back, swung it back, and the back right quarter panel came just slamming into a pickup truck that was coming in the opposite direction. A New England gentleman who had been picking up his kids from school, and he said, "I'll never forget it." He said, "Going a little fast, weren't you, fellas?" And that was pretty much the end of the glory days of that ride. Although it continued to function. She was never quite the same. Yeah.
Man, every answer you have just keeps getting better, man. This is gold, man. I had this vision of you coming out of DC, jacked up from working all summer in this cool car. Yeah. Playing lacrosse. People may not know that you were a lacrosse player, right? In addition what did you play on the lacrosse team?
What's that?
What position did you play on the lacrosse team?
I was attacked, but that's a long story too. I was leading scorer freshman, sophomore year, even though I had been a goalie in high school. That's another long story. But I played extra man, long story, offense in high school. Long story why the sophomore goalie beat me out that freshman year. But anyway, 2 games into the season, they put me at attack. Had a great friend of mine named Fox Smith who used to feed me, and I would score. So I was leading scorer first 2 years until I started acting, at which point I became like Fox and another guy named Pete Veely were All-American, All-American senior year. And they look at me like, dude, what happened to you? Because I was like the theater knucklehead, But yeah, I did play lacrosse, and you played football, of course.
Yeah. Well, you've been, you've been kind of on the attack ever since in different ways. And I wanted to make sure we get into this moment that we're in, right? And part of what I believe, Jeffrey, is I think it's a global war we're in, right, against this common enemy, to kind of frame it up. But there's still a feeling in my heart that some people are in it. Some people really feel it and recognize the stakes and the seriousness of it, and some who don't, right? There's kind of 2 camps here: the camp that know we're at war and the camp who don't. And you're right next to a hospital. As we're talking, we're on Zoom, so apologies and thanks to everyone for bearing with the technical challenges. But there are sirens going by your house constantly, right? They've been going by my house constantly for weeks. I've been stopping interviews to do it. And, you're in a very high impact zone, and you've got a 90-year-old aunt in your house, right? So can you break down, given your understanding of history and, your activism and just your wealth of perspective, what do you make of this moment and the stakes that we're in, and just break it down in whatever way you're comfortable, the political dynamics that are in play here?
Well, so you don't want to hear any more about my former lacrosse glory days, right?
I do. I mean, I could talk about that,
bro. That's all I got, bro. I can't do that stuff anymore. Anyway,
I can talk about that all day long, man. But we'll go on. This will turn into the Rogan podcast. We'll be here for 3 hours.
Oh boy, we don't want to do that. Let's stay right here, baby. I think one of the things that we are suffering from right now are the results of the last few years of misinformation, of deceptive messaging from Trump, from the White House, an absence of veracity, an absence of clear fact-based messaging, because that right now is the answer to public safety. That's the first step, right? Is understanding what we're facing and what we do about it. We're not getting that from the executive level of the federal government, and that approach is criminal to me. This is a situation that doesn't read the propaganda, that doesn't hear it. The COVID, just biologically incapable of buying into that shit, right? So it's going to do what it's going to do regardless. I, for a number of reasons, became pretty deeply involved in the Ebola situation back in 2014, 2015. I'd been involved in some work in Sierra Leone for about a decade. That was my focus, more so even than acting at the time. We happened to work very closely with a community of about 15,000 people on some economic development opportunities around natural resources, both mineral and agricultural. Long story how I got involved in this, but again, it was tied to my educational background and my interests. And I had an opportunity to visit during the war in Sierra Leone with a guy who worked as security on a film called Ali that we shot in Mozambique. He happened to be a former SAS guy, badass. He was of the first Fijian regiment of the SAS. We became close very quickly. We worked together over a month and a half. He took me to Sierra Leone because I'd been studying the war for a number of reasons. I said, Fred, where do you live? His name was Fred Marafono. He passed away a few years ago. He said, oh, Sierra Leone. I said, wait, Sierra Leone? What are you doing in Sierra Leone? I said, He said, oh, I said, how long you been there? He said, 94. I said, what, 94? I'm going, what? The war kicked off, and I'm going, what? And then I went, oh, security, Sierra Leone, 94, ding, 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 ding. This guy was freelance, but it was more complicated than that. He had Sierra Leone to set up a security operation at a gold exploration site, and ended up staying during the war and working with the government to try to quell this rebellion. Anyway, I ended up going with him there. First time I'd been in a war zone, because he wanted me to come and see with my own eyes what was happening. So I said, I called my Carmen. She was pregnant at the time. I said, hey, this guy wants to take me to Sierra Leone. She said, well, you got to go. It's all you ever talk about, So I ended up going with him, seeing from, kind of ground truthing. It was a ceasefire at the time. I'd never seen so many guns in my life, though. 17,000 UN troops in country at the time. I stayed there for 4 days just to bear witness to what was happening. Again, for a number of reasons that will take too long to explain. And I left. I ended up starting some projects there, trying to help with the rebuilding to the extent that I could of that country. We ended up working with this community, 15,000 people on the Guinea border, northeast corner of the country, 40 miles from patient zero, just over in Guinea. So in late spring 2014, I started reading about these reports of Ebola outbreak in Guinea. Reached out to the local chiefdom leadership, paramount chief, guy named Jabila. I said, hey man, you got to keep an eye out for this thing. It's not a, I could imagine, oh bro, just keep an eye out, Sure enough, it crossed the border. I'd reached out to the WHO to understand what the needs were. They said, okay, you need PPEs, you need bleach, you need washing stations, stuff like that. We had been working on some agricultural projects with cacao farmers, training them up. This was purely social development. We were doing commercial development on one side and social investment on the other. And so this was, working with cacao farmers, training them up to fair trade standards, working with women's vegetable co-op, training them up. So we diverted $10,000 away from that toward helping the chiefdom prepare itself for this outbreak, which they did, setting up washing stations. They put up a border patrol, all of these things. They lost one person throughout that outbreak. One person, a doctor who had been outside the chiefdom in a nearby town, came back, was infected. He knew what he had. He self-isolated. There was a nurse who looked after him, and unfortunately he perished, but no one else did. And this is a community with relatively nothing, zero in healthcare infrastructure. The reach of the healthcare system there, as fragile as it was tenuous at best in this area, right? But nonetheless, with early intervention and organization, they were able to stave this thing off. So I became involved for that reason in trying to spread the message around what was happening during Ebola, because I was, just one of the few Americans who had spent a lot of time directly in that area and in that region. And I knew that Americans were not as susceptible to that virus as we thought we were. We weren't, because what we didn't appreciate was that people died more so, yes, because the virus was ferocious and the fatality rate was high, but more so because people lacked access to healthcare, to intensive care, and even quality care. So that's why folks were dying in such great numbers, right? They were way out there in the bush, man. It took us 12 hours to get there by road, and it's only like 120 kilometers, really isolated areas. I visited hospitals because we had helped set up birthing stations for women in our community. So, things like that, little small healthcare initiatives that we could take on that would be impactful. And so I visited hospitals there. There was a government hospital that served 500,000 people in that area. The operating room lights were powered by a car battery, right? So that's the type of protection these folks had against that thing. We were all freaked out over here. Relax. You got a healthcare system. This thing doesn't transmit so easily. You got to be intimate with someone's excretions. So, we were way off the mark. And I think in some ways, it might have, because of the end result was very positive for us in the United States in terms of cases, right. I think it might have lulled us into a little bit of a complacency about this, right? But this is a very different situation. This virus doesn't spreads much more easily. It's not nearly as virulent, as we're coming to understand it. And again, I'm not an expert. I'm just interpreting what I get, but this was a very different situation, right? So as well, when you started to look at what was happening in Wuhan back in January, you heard, a couple news stories. But when because of my experience with the Ebola thing, I had a chance to meet Tony Fauci at one point, Larry Brilliant at one point, who was at WHO and part of the team responsible for eradication of smallpox. I knew where to go for information. And at one point, I had been asked to narrate a documentary back in 2016, 2017, called Unseen Enemy, that aired on CNN, in which they talk at length about the possibility of a coming pandemic. And they explain what possible scenarios could be, whether it was a wet market, in Asia, where a zoonotic virus was born, or whether, it skips from animal to human, or, any number of possibilities, industrial animal husbandry here in our country. That is potentially dangerous. Of course, now there are reports that perhaps it leaked from, labs studying it, but nonetheless, we don't know. But what we do know that is documented is that scientists have been talking about this for years as a possibility, right? So when I heard, Wuhan, okay, kind of kept my eye on it. And then one day, I think it may have been after the first case, or no, it was prior to the first case in the States. I remember one day I said, let me just Google Wuhan, where is this town? And then I realized, no, it's not a town at all. It's a city of 11 million people and a transportation hub inclusive of international flights to the United States. And this is a virus that, as far as we knew there, passed more or less like a common cold. Red flags on fucking fire, bro. This was mid-January. And anybody who saw that, who's in a leadership position at the federal government, should have been wide awake to this possibility. And the steps that, when I came back from Sierra Leone in 2015, after going over there just to check in, the outbreak was subsiding, but nonetheless, when I came back, I got calls every day from the CDC. What's your temperature? How are you feeling? I was checked at, I was taken aside when I entered customs, temperature, questionnaire, the whole thing. They were monitoring me for the next, I think it was 21 days. There was a system in place to test to some extent, to monitor and trace, right? Boom. That's exactly what should have been happening immediately after that first case. You're talking about banning travel. Yeah, okay, great. But you had 300,000 people in the month of January that came in from China, right? And you didn't ban travel, you fucking idiot, for everyone coming back. It was just for those with a Chinese passport, as though, this virus was checking people's passport credentials, right? I mean, it's just grounded in pure, self-aggrandizing, self-fulfilling fantasy, and it has no place in proactive, meaningful political leadership, because it's entirely ineffectual, and it's a damn show, man. It's putting on. Thankfully, I'm too involved now to watch the TV and watch the briefings and stuff.
Yeah.
But this is some farcical, ridiculous show that that's continuing to be put on while people are dying, and I am able to tamp down my anger by getting involved at the local level with my community to some extent, and that is saving me, saving my head from exploding with outrage, frustration, and a serious sense of pissed offness at this nonsense that we are having to face in the midst of an historic crisis in our country that none of us has ever seen.
So I usually ask guests, what makes you angry? But I think I got that.
Yeah.
I think I got it. But there's
I got, you know, bro, as you say, I got
yeah.
my 90-year-old aunt sitting downstairs right now. She's glued to the TV herself in between playing Scrabble and doing her puzzles. And, you know, and she's wondering, former nurse, you know, where are these antigen and antibody tests? You know, that's what she's, you know what I mean? I mean, you know, we all, I can name, there are 4 guys working at a couple of the restaurants over here in our neighborhood, gone. There was a guy who worked in a deli over here. There was a guy who worked at one of the restaurants. There was a bouncer who worked at one of the bars over here. They checked out, man. They moved on. There was a guy who's got a diner over here. His mother, gone. There's another guy at a restaurant. One of the first places I like to eat when I come back, they do this Nashville hot chicken. When I come back to town from working, I'm like, man, I got to get that chicken. Yeah. Young guy, man. He's just coming out of an induced coma. He had a temperature of 106. He was medevaced. He was up in Massachusetts. They medevaced him to a hospital in Boston. Yeah. This was 3 weeks ago. He's barely making it, man. This is like, you know, he's going to be okay, it seems. I've got, you know, I mean, it's just the stories are everywhere.
Yeah, and I think that's what I've been trying to sound the alarm about, and I know other folks have as well. I mean, it's easy to feel like, you know, if we want to use like a 9/11 comparison, it kind of feels like parts of America are like Iraq and Afghanistan, and the rest of folks are marginally inconvenienced. Some places it's getting increasingly inconvenienced, right? But if you're in New York, if you're in Seattle, if you're increasingly in New Orleans, Detroit, DC, other cities, now you're losing people around you, right? Now it's shifted into a new phase. And, you know, I remember talking to folks during the AIDS movement, which
we were marginally inconvenienced at one point too.
Right. And now it's spreading in a way that I still feel like there are some of us that are deep in the fight, that are losing friends all around us, and other folks are still watching it on TV. But the difference here is this one is going to come across, right? This is not George Bush saying, hey, the terrorists are going to come blow up your mall in Topeka, Kansas. This is a real thing that's coming into your supermarkets. It's coming in to the nursing homes, and we're seeing that all across the country. So I've been, over the last month and a half on this show especially, I've been trying to bring people perspective and information and insight from the front lines. And I think most folks who maybe clicked on this podcast didn't know how close to this you are. And I'm glad you got into the Ebola experience, because I wanted you to talk about that. But you've also shifted it into action. You're mobilizing and organizing your community in a really powerful way, turning that anger into positive impact. So can you talk about Brooklyn for Life and what you're actually doing to organize people in Fort Greene and throughout Brooklyn right now?
Yeah, sure. You know, I'll tell you the facts as they are. They started off pretty simply. I was just trying to help out a couple buddies of mine whose food I like to eat, man. You know, Michael Thompson, his spot, Brooklyn Moon, has been in this community for 25 years. I've lived here for 20 years. I used to play, you know, we don't play so much more anymore, but I used to go there. We play chess, man. We had, there was a chess crew that came in there. We, you know, drank our whiskey or whatever. We played chess and grabbed some, you know, some jerk wings. And, you know, he's an institution here. Yeah. Vito Randazzo owns a place called Graziella's just up the road, 4 blocks up, you know, great pizza. He's been there for 15 years. I order, you know, my kids and I order his pizza on the regular. His lasagna, oh my God, you want him there when this is all done. I want that lasagna there. I want that goat cheese salad, that calamari there, okay? I want Mike there. I want to go in for some jerk wings and a whiskey over there, you know? So this was like, there was selfish intent behind this. And I was like, hey guys, it started with Mike. He's not a delivery-oriented space. When I was in London, I said, Michael, man, we're going to go on lockdown. I know it's coming. So you better be prepared and, you know, maybe reorganize yourself to a delivery mode so that you can, you know, you can stay afloat through this. So I told him, I'll help you, you know, boost it on social media, you know, that you have. And so I got back here, I think it was March 15th. I got back shortly thereafter. We went on lockdown. You know, Mike had, you know, done what he could to adjust. And I called him the next day. I said, hey, Mike, man, I said, how you doing? He said, bro, I did 5 orders today, man. I'm like, oh, wow. Okay, that's not sustainable, you know? So then someone shortly thereafter pinged me that Vito had on social media that Vito had been delivering pizzas to the hospital. He had customers call in to buy pizzas on behalf of Brooklyn Hospital staff. And I thought, Michael and I were thinking about how we, other means for, helping his business. And I thought about the hospital, but I assumed the cafeteria was up and running and they didn't need the help. But Vito put me in touch with a guy named Lenny Singletary over there, who's just an incredible, soldier in this thing. He is external affairs VP for the hospital. Got in touch with him. Vito and I went down to meet with him. We chatted 6 feet apart, mask on outside the hospital. He said, actually we could use the augmentation of our cafeteria because we got people working 15, 16-hour days. They're not going home. They're staying in hotels near the hospital. There's, nothing to eat late at night. So if you can help us, that'd be great. So that was March 27th we began. I think March 25th, I started the GoFundMe page, and it was really oriented toward these two restaurants, Graziella's and Brooklyn Moon, delivering 200 meals per day to Brooklyn Hospital. So we, of course, started thinking about other restaurants, and I was like, man, I really love that fried chicken at Peaches. I want that to be there. And they were friends of mine as well. This is one of the gentlemen, this is the guy, there are two partners. One is emerging from this coma right now as a result of COVID. So I reached out, and that's when I heard from his that was going on. So anyway, they started to reach out to their circle. We pulled in more restaurants. We needed to increase the demand, so we reached out to additional hospitals. Lenny put us in touch. The Brooklyn Borough President, Eric Adams' office, reached out, said, hey, I hear what you're doing. We love this. We want to expand it Brooklyn-wide, and we'll support you in doing that. They've been incredible. So now we have 38 partner restaurants throughout Brooklyn. We're delivering on average over 2,500 meals per day. We've got 6 medical facilities in Brooklyn. We've got 1 in Lower Manhattan, New York Presbyterian, that we're serving because they snuck in there because everybody wants to be in Brooklyn, Yeah. So we're serving them.
That's my neighborhood. That's where my kid was born.
Oh, wow. So we got 7 medical facilities, and we've got all 10 EMS stations in Brooklyn. And that has been with the help of the VP for EMS Officers Union, Anthony Almiero, who has been in just, man, these guys, he's been incredible in helping us make the outreach, but also he's been wonderful, wonderfully supportive in the midst of everything he's going through. And he's been, kind of giving me insight as to what the paramedics and EMTs are going through. And man, that ain't a story that's going away anytime soon, because what they're seeing, you talked about 9/11, one of the hospital reps described is what we're going through now is 9/11 in slow motion. And what Anthony told me was that they're receiving, this was a couple of weeks ago, they were receiving more calls daily than they received on 9/11. 9/11 was the record, 6,500 calls per day. They were hitting 7,200 calls, 6,500 calls every day. And of course, on 9/11, sadly, a lot of those calls didn't involve patients ultimately. These calls involve a patient every day. And what they're facing is a lot of situations for the paramedics in which they, as he describes to me, they show up and they're unable to do anything. And so he's telling me, man, I had 12 cardiac arrests today, and there was nothing that could be done. We can't take them in. It's, it's too late. And, this is COVID related. And, they're seeing things that's really putting the grind on their psyches. And this is a story that needs to be followed going forward. Like the story of your colleagues coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. This is a story I think that's going to need to be followed in terms of, the moral injury for these folks going forward, as well as those who are being affected by this thing. So I think that's what Brooklyn for Life is, man.
Yeah, it's leadership, man. It's so inspiring to see this grow. And I have, my best friend lives in Fort Greene. I have a lot of friends who live in your neighborhood, and they know that we're in touch, and they see us interact at events and on Twitter. And they said, man, your friend Jeffrey's doing awesome out here. Let him know how much we appreciate it. We've had Rob Serra on the show, who's been talking about the need for first responders and firefighters and cops and EMTs, and they continue to be underserved and under-resourced. So, there's a parallel here. It's our firefighters, it's our doctors, it's now our active duty troops, it's veterans dying in nursing homes. It's all these folks that we're asking to be frontline fighters against the virus, and they're walking in with no body armor and no ammunition. And if they don't get backup from someone
Yeah.
like you, they're stranded. So I think, you're making a huge impact on the ground.
Well, hold on, Paul.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, but this is a grassroots thing, and I'm the guy up front, but these restaurant owners and these restaurant workers are busting ass, man.
I love that.
They are they're amped up about this. They're feeling engaged, they're feeling purposeful. And for example, I called Interfaith Hospital in Bed-Stuy. They have a cafeteria that's run by a private company, farmed out, and the company reduced operations so that they were only providing meals for patients. So I called up this beautiful woman named Shirani Perry. She herself had just gotten out of ICU with something unrelated, but she works as an administrator over there. And I said, hey, I'm just, Jeffrey Wright, we've just started this thing. Just wanted to see if you guys are okay for meals. She said, what? She said, I need 600 meals a day,
Wow.
And so she said, she told me that, they were no longer providing meals. The facility was no longer providing meals to the staff, and everything's closed. And we're asking them to do, this heroic work with no fuel. So it's these restaurant owners. I think the wonderful thing about it is there's a need on both sides. There's a critical need at the front line for basic sustenance.
Yep.
The restaurant owners need revenues to stay afloat, keep their, some employees. They're maybe not fully staffed, but at least keep few, folks working and paid. And also, we're taking donations, but in some ways, it's not a charity, right? We're 501c3, not-for-profit, tax-deductible donation now. But everybody who is donating, who lives in this community, needs to do this for their own well-being. They need to look out for those folks at those hospitals, because if they go down, hell's breaking out, and we're all gonna suffer. So this is about the whole community. The whole structure of this thing is everybody looking out for one another, and at the same time looking out for themselves. So a little bit of
that's leadership. We've talked a lot about the importance of humility and leadership on this show, and I think that's what is a constant for you. But it is an important thing that's happening, where you've got the borough president, and you've got people in the hospitals, and you've got you and the restaurant owners, and there's an alchemy here that has to happen. That's like at the heart of community organizing, and at the heart of responding to any kind of an immediate threat of this magnitude. And if you are one or the catalyst and a part of that mix, I think it's what is so inspiring for me about this. But it's also a contrast, Jeffrey. So you are showing a kind of leadership. Those restaurant owners are showing a kind of leadership. At the same time, we've got the president on one side, and we've got, in my view, de Blasio also, who has been slow and has been uninformed and has been defensive. And I think
hasn't really stepped up to the moment. I have to say,
Yeah.
hasn't really been. Unlike Cuomo looks like he was born for this, man. Everybody's dealing with the same data sets and information, and that's been changing day to day. We know only as much as we know or can know. So he's made some missteps along the way, but in terms of information, which is understandable. But as far as leadership, as far as this clarity of his voice, the compassion with which he has delivered information and directive, man. I mean, it looks like he was born. He came out of the womb reading the manual on this thing, man. It's been really comforting.
Everybody's getting dealt a shitty hand of cards, and you got to figure out how to play them, right? And not just the tactics, but the spirit and the strategy. And you can now see who's got the chops for this and who doesn't, but also who's got the character for it, right? Yeah. And I see a lot of parallels between the way de Blasio handles it and Trump does. And I've said oftentimes there's similarities to them, the way they come after the media, the way they don't take responsibility. It may be a reach for some people, but when you're close to it, I think you can see that there are parallels that when the shit hits the fan start to reveal themselves. But there's been a failure of leadership in so many different levels. I want to ask you, Jeffrey, number one, now that Biden is the nominee, your thoughts. You've been very active in raising your voice about the process and criticizing fairly the president. What's your thoughts now on Biden and the landscape, and you personally? Would you ever run for office locally in Brooklyn or at the city level? We'd love to see you as a mayor right now instead of de Blasio, but would you ever take that leap yourself, maybe later in your career at some other point in your life?
I'm a creative guy. I think there's a place for an infusion, as I described earlier, of politics and art. I like that role. I like, applauding when the politicians do well, and I like throwing stones at the motorcade when they don't. I like that role. I don't know if my personality is ego and all that thing is suited for it. I like to have my alone time, don't bother me, and, you got to be accountable all the time. So maybe that's a shortcoming for me in terms of that. But I think that you were asking about, less about me. You were asking about
about Biden. Yeah. Now that Biden is nominee, as we record this today on Wednesday,
yeah,
Elizabeth Warren came out and supported him. Obama's now unleashed. I've often used another HBO show as a parallel when I talk about Game of Thrones. Now the tribes are coming together around their Jon Snow, and these dragons coming online, right? Like
the Avengers are assembling.
Yeah, Obama's coming online and Biden's coming online, and some of them are dragons and some of them are giants, but they're all coming now around this central leader who has been designated as Biden. But what are your thoughts now on him and the future of this process and what we need? How do we as activists, and how are you as an activist going to engage in this now that the ultimate battle has come, as another battlefield unfolds around us? It's Biden versus Trump. What are your thoughts on where we are right now?
I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that that Joe Biden is the next president of the United States. I don't think we have any choice. I was in, if you're watching the show Westworld, you can see that we filmed in Singapore last summer.
Yeah.
First time I'd been there. First time I'd been to the region, really. Southeast Asia, closest I've been Hawaii to that region, and so was there. Beautiful place, incredible architecture, futuristic and well ordered, but also it's a velvet totalitarian state. You're not going to say everything you want to say over there. You're not going to create the type of art that we create over there because freedom of expression has given birth to the stories we tell here, the music we play here. That's why the music we play here is heard all over the world. That music that came from the South, from people emerging out of bondage and making lyrical beauty and expressions of hope through the blues that changed the way the world listened to music because it resonated with the freedom that they aspired to. When they played rock and roll on the Berlin Wall, it was homage to those Black folks in the South, right, who created that music. And that was because even though we had problems here, we were still a country that was about freedom of expression first and foremost, and a society that bucked against authoritarianism every step along the way. And when I went to Singapore, I went, ooh, wow, man. Okay, you look at Singapore, you look at the Philippines, China, you look at Russia, Hungary, you look at Brazil, you go, oh man, there's dominoes tumbling here, right? And toward authoritarianism, and these impulses are being lit all over the country, all over the world. And if they happen in our country, if we allow that to happen in the United States of America, who's showing up on D-Day, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the only thing. We're not perfect. We're flawed, but at least, we give space. We give space for the idea of freedom, right? And sometimes we get a glimpse of it and we actually realize a bit of real freedom too, so we can't, if that dies, then, we go. And this guy, Trump, because he's he's intellectually lazy, he's narcissistic, he lacks curiosity, he's deeply, deeply, pathetically insecure. He's allowed these impulses toward authoritarianism, and we've learned that there's a portion of our country that is susceptible and submissive to that, desirous of that. You see it reflected in the evangelical culture. You see all of these subsets of our society that are, wary of their freedom. Eric Fromm wrote some great essays on the authoritarian personality and who's susceptible to it, and the symbiotic relationship between the leader and the follower, and this desire to escape freedom and all of these things, and you look at it and it maps out as to what's going on here. We have no fucking choice, man. And if you love yourself, and you appreciate that you as an American, although we have problems, that you are defined more so than so many other places in this world, your ability to say what the fuck you want at core, you might take some hits, but that's a fundamental right here. If you recognize that, then you have no choice but to do everything you can to put Joe Biden in the White House. And I understand he's not perfect, but if we do that at the same time, Bernie Sanders is coming along with him. Mm-hmm. Last year, 2016, Bernie Sanders himself said the Democratic platform is the most progressive that the party has ever drafted.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah, that's true.
And likewise this time, it's a big tent, and we have to be inclusive of the left-leaning movement in our country right now, particularly among youth. And this outbreak has shown us that intense vulnerabilities that Bernie was trying to articulate around healthcare, the safety net, and all of that. The key is, how do we get there? We don't get there through catchphrases and a mantra. There are many many ways to skin this, but his voice is a powerful one right now for me in terms of where we're going as we head toward November. He's not out of the picture. He just came in and endorsed Biden. Of course, Obama and Elizabeth Warren today. I mean, as I was looking at those debates, and as I'm reading, platforms from each of these candidates, it's like, come on, man. Can we synthesize all the best ideas? There's some great ideas here. Yep. They don't necessarily, all of them aren't housed in one individual candidate. But if we can synthesize all those best ideas and express them through one candidate, and not only will we have a powerful chance in November, we'll have a great agenda to push forward and some great work to do and some great outcomes to achieve. So, man, I mean, it's time to dust off gird yourself, throw the ego out. If you weren't Biden, yeah, okay, no, man, let's do this, man. God damn it, there's no way, not 4 seconds more of this paucity of leadership in Washington D.C. at the executive level, because it has consequences. And there are people who died from this COVID outbreak, who did not have to die as a result of the leadership in Washington, D.C. And if you don't see that now, if you don't care about that now, then you don't care about anything. Mm-hmm.
Yes. I mean, stakes has never been higher, and that's what I've been.
It's Angry Americans, right? This is the Angry American show, right, Paul? Right now.
That was like a 10-minute commercial for this show right there, man. That's what it's all about, and I'm so glad that you got a chance to run with it, because one of the things I've always known about you in my knowing you is that I think folks maybe watch you in the parts you play, and they think, man, he's a fantastic actor, and these are other people's words that maybe you're performing, but your words, your rhetoric and your oration and your understanding and your vision and just your rhythm and your intensity is so powerful and important. I mean,
let me tell you about that.
The way you break it down, hold on if I can. Like, the way you break it down is a way that especially right now, has a righteous anger to it. And when I talk about righteous, I talk about angry Americans. It was everybody from George Washington to Harvey Milk was an angry Americans. And I think people are not angry enough. And what you choose to do with that, in the same way you play those cards as a politician, is the key. And you are recognizing, I think, identifying something that I've been trying to say. Look, the existential threat is Trump. Like, the coronavirus isn't even, in my view, as big of a threat as Trump, because there will be other things. We will beat the coronavirus. We'll find a way.
There are two outbreaks.
If we don't take out Trump, then he could fuck up the next thing. The next thing could be Korea. The next thing could be, anything else that happens. So we've got to recognize that he is still the primary mission, is beating him. And I'm an independent. So many of us are not Democrats or don't have a party or Republicans. So now, if we can finally align against the pandemic and then use that as momentum to align against Trump and then look ahead to rebuild, that's where I think our minds need to be. And we got to pick ourselves up out of the immediate 5-meter target fight and recognize that this has such everlasting consequences. And I really do think it's the fight of our time. I mean, this is our world war. And we're truly interconnected.
I agree. And if you look at what Biden...
Yeah, please.
I agree. But and to your point, if you look at, in terms of, the next phase in the battle, if you look at what Biden said, he's talking about one term. He said, I'm not running 2 terms. This is a bridge, right? Let's get us a bridge out and a bridge toward. And let's use that. And his VP candidate is going to be, a major decision. It always is, but even more so now, because that could potentially be your next president. Should he, have the good fortune of being elected. I like, and I like Elizabeth Warren, I have to tell you, because I think she is too. She represents a bridge between, spaces on the spectrum. She's progressive, but she also speaks to the center, or at least the economic center, in a way that says, listen, I just want to put you in check, right? I don't want to destroy, the economic system, but the economic system needs to work better for all. She recognizes that the engine is a powerful one, but the engine is not inclusive of all. So it's about major reforms and protections in a very specific way. I mean, I think the two of them together as a bridge, Joe Biden as a bridge toward, a kind of a more progressive view, but a progressive view that's appreciative, that we're all, we're out of one many. There are many perspectives and many institutions that you may hate them, but they're still here. Wall Street, maybe destructive in some ways, but Wall Street is not going anywhere anytime soon. And you better figure out a way to incentivize Wall Street to do those progressive things that you want. Incentivize Wall Street to invest in communities like Brownsville, Brooklyn, right? So that Brownsville, Brooklyn kids have economic opportunities that are going to lead them away from the destructive opportunities of incarceration and toward more productive lives. But Wall Street could play a role there. Wall Street doesn't have to be an enemy to that. Anyway, I like her kind of pragmatism. And I also, like the fact that we do need the female influence on our political, highest level of political leadership. We've had, 250 years of male mistakes. Hey, a woman let's give a woman the right to, do some great things and maybe have a few mistakes too. I mean, come on, man, it's absurd, it's ridiculous.
Well, I think you're nailing something important about Biden as a bridge, or as a Band-Aid, or as the consoler in chief. Or we've gone through this terribly traumatic experience that is the Trump presidency, compounded by now the coronavirus. We need someone to bring the temperature down, to make people feel better, to be a unifier, in a way that we're starting to see around Biden, in some ways, not even because of him, just because he has now become the leader who the process has chosen, and a recognition that he is the one that is going to be in the ring against Trump. But I think, I don't know where they're going to go on the VP candidate. I don't think there's ever been a more important VP choice. I will identify something I think is really important. I've been talking about the show. I'm glad Biden's in a basement. I'm glad he's in a basement. I'm glad he's not out shaking hands. I mean, as long as
Excellent.
I've said this all along,
No,
if
dude.
Biden, the only thing that was going to stop Biden is if he dies or if he gets sick. And I said that before coronavirus. That was going to be the way
Yeah.
I saw it unfolding. And similarly, between Trump and Sanders and Nancy Pelosi, a lot of them are now increasingly vulnerable with the coronavirus out there. So if Biden's going to be in a basement for the next
Yeah.
7 months, good. And he's got, Obama and Michelle and Warren and Buttigieg and so many other people that are dynamic, especially on a little box like this. I think it's a really exciting landscape of adversaries for Trump to have to face. But I want to ask you, Jeffrey, if I can, in this pandemic, people are connecting with you in your activism and your work, but a lot of them are also hunkered down watching shitloads of Westworld, right? If Biden's down there in the basement, he's probably watching Westworld. The whole world is watching Westworld right now.
That's cool.
So can I ask you, your thoughts on Westworld in this moment? Right? Because, there's going to be critics who pull it apart. We all have our fans. I'm a massive fan of the show. I think you're brilliant. I think the show is brilliant. But what are your thoughts on Westworld right now in this moment? For some people, it's an escape. For some people, maybe it's a bit of a wake-up call. But what are your thoughts on how Westworld is impacting or you'd like to impact this moment in history?
Well, Westworld, particularly this year, looks a lot like our world. And hey, buddy, give me a sec. My son just walked in. Give me a sec, Lige.
I'll wrap up with your dad in a second.
Yeah. So it's speaking to the ways in which we behave. It speaks to the drivers that inform our behavior, technology, the manipulation of technology, the manipulation of messaging and things like that. So without giving too much away, I mean, we're still exploring, from a construct of, futuristic construct, we're very much exploring the world we all inhabit right now. Now, the ways in which it, this COVID has affected that, obviously, we're all hunkered down. A lot of people are watching it. But I think there's an outbreak that has occurred prior to COVID. That outbreak involves technology and its misuse, misinformation, disinformation, the division that has been fomented by the technology and abuse of the technology. You're on Twitter, I'm on Twitter. It's like, holy man, we're, who among us was able to forecast the ways in which the information age would mutate into the disinformation age and a divisive, embittered age. And so that was one of those first viral outbreaks, right?
Yeah.
So the explorations, I think perhaps that we're on this, this year in the show are more relevant in their metaphors than they might have been otherwise. But we always, Jonah, Nolan, Lisa Joy are some brilliant thinkers, and they're probing, from a technological side and a social side. Jonah's very close with Elon Musk, very good friends with him. He gets insight on AI from him and who do I talk to, and he talks to other, and he himself was a programmer, Jonah, too. And Lisa went to Harvard Law and was off, doing other things at McKinsey and wherever else. And it's like, what world am I in? And she started writing. These are really interesting thinkers and really capable writers and great leaders too. Great leaders, optimistic leaders. Big show, a lot of money, a lot of moving parts, complex stories, but they rally everyone. And we hit some bumps in the road, but I've never seen Jonah not take a challenge or crisis, however small, relative to what we do, and convert it into an opportunity. He always looks at, okay, that's okay. What I'll do, I'm going to reshape it and we'll go that way with the story. Don't worry about it. And I'm always like, fuck, why don't we do that? He's like, no, don't worry about it, bro. I got it. We'll, and we'll move on. So, great leaders, man. And I hope everybody's digging what we do, because we dig it. And we love doing it together too.
Yeah.
The showrunners, those two, the writers, the directors, but also, people talk about, people have a perception of what we do. You were talking about, oh, he says words somebody else writes. Well, less so on this show, when I rewrite some stuff too. But we're interpreters of language, right? Actors, we interpret language, we interpret story, just like a musician who plays, the guy sitting over in Carnegie Hall, or my very good friend who plays violin at the Met. He's interpreting that 300, 400-year-old music. We interpret this stuff, and we choose what we do because it speaks to us. But also, what people don't understand about what we do is that when we make these things, it's a collective of people that aren't just in front of the camera and in newspapers or whatever the heck it is. They're carpenters, they're electricians, they're grips, they're craftsmen of all types coming together, to tell these stories. And that's the best part of doing what we do, for me, is being a part of that circle, right? And when the camera's on, they look at me, working class guys, I'm getting paid pretty well. They look at me and they go, okay, he's with us. All right, let's kill it. Let's kill it. Let's move that, let's 65 toss power trap. Let's matriculate the ball down the field, boys. I love that. I shake hands with my key grip, Mike Anderson. He looks me in the eye, and the first thing in the morning, he knows we're gonna roll. It's a great game.
And you throw Marshawn Lynch in the mix too.
Hey, baby, beast mode. Put yourself in.
I was not ready for that when he came on. I lost my shit. I was like, holy shit, that's Marshawn Lynch. My wife was like, who? And I was like, it's fucking Marshawn Lynch. But it is spectacular. It's stunning. It's beautiful this season, especially.
Oh man,
so visually just awe-inspiring. Yeah. But it's also very important, and I know it's given people a lot of relief and connection. It gives folks something to connect on that's inspiring, that's thoughtful, but also can connect us in other ways. And I want to let you go. I know your son is coming in. I have one final question to ask you that I ask of all guests, which is, Jeffrey Wright, what makes you happy? What makes you happy?
Seeing my son right there.
Yeah.
That makes me happy, man. Family makes me happy. And surfing and the ocean. Surfing. Especially with my family. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, the final thing we do is a presentation of the gifts. I can't do it to you physically, but I will normally present you with some Angry Americans gear that I will send to you. Okay, that's cool. That's coming your way. American made by veterans in the United States. I will also send you a bottle of whiskey, and I have to carefully select the right bottle for you. Now you have your own whiskey company. That's going to be tough, but I'm going to find one for you. And I normally have
you too.
And I normally have 3 kinds of peeps. I ran out of my peep stash, but Easter just came up. It was a tradition on the show, and I ask all guests, if you had blue, yellow, or pink peeps, which color would you choose, Jeffrey Wright, and why?
Yeah, I got to go yellow, man. I'm kind of a traditionalist in some ways. The good old yellow peeps take me back home, man. Yeah.
You're a classic guy, man. I figured. And then lastly, I will send you some awesome stuff from Bravo Sierra. They are a sponsor. They have antibacterial body wipes. So if you don't get to leave your house for a long time, they will be on their way to you as well. And you can watch.
Yeah, I keep it in the pocket, man. I ordered 4 gallons online about 6 weeks ago. This is my kit. When I go, I got this. I got my mask over there. Hey, man.
You're getting after it, man, and you are. We always want inspiring, iconic, important Americans as guests on this show, and you are one that since I started this show, I really wanted to have this conversation. You've been doing so much for this country, for this globe, for this community. I really consider you a role model for me and so many other people, and I'm just grateful for you, man. Grateful for your leadership, for your voice, for your talent, for your generosity, and in this moment, to see you continuing to find ways to use your talents and use your network to move the country forward is a real source of hope and inspiration at a time when folks really need it. Well, so thank you for all you do, and thank you for joining me on this program. I'm going to continue to support you in any way I can. We're going to let people support the charities that you're involved in, but thank you, man, for all you do.
Well, I appreciate all that. Just trying to be like you, bro. I mean, just trying to do my, do my part here, and try to avoid sitting here grizzled and getting fat.
Well,
That,
we're just too old. We're not Lord Jeffs anymore, so we're mammoths. And the
right.
motto of the school is that terrace are radiant, let them bring light upon the world. And you are bringing light everywhere you go, man.
Well, come on.
That's it. I'm gonna leave it there and say
Yeah.
thank
Okay.
you.
All right.
And
That's a lot.
as
That's
I
a
sign
lot.
off, I'll say, keep bringing the light. Thank you to your son. Thank you to the turtles.
Here's my light. Here's my boy here. He just stepped back in. So yeah.
His dad's a good man, but stay frosty, my friend. Thank you for doing this.
Hey, cool, Paul. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, man. Appreciate your voice and all this, and of course, all the work you've done, man. And I'm just honored to be here with you, bro.
Excellent. Thank you, my friend.
All right. See you, man.
All right.